podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be
Yeah,
here.
it's great to have you again. We're in the middle of this little series where we're walking through some of the chapters from Paul's book, What Jesus Meant, how he was engaging with the dialogues and the discussions and the discourse of his own day. And we're on this chapter, Jesus versus the wealthy, and we talk a lot about wealth. And, for a Christian podcast, we talk a lot about wealth. We talk about mammon on this podcast, and so
Good job.
I'm eager to chop it up with you about this stuff.
Come on.
Yeah. You start this chapter with narcissistic Christianity. That's what you call it. What do you mean by that? And can you give us some examples of what kind of what you mean by narcissistic Christianity and how that's connected with this chapter on wealth?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, most people start in the Christian faith in order to get something from God that they want. So it's about, I can get God to take care of something for me, as opposed to, I'm going to get on board with like God's mission in the world. Like I'm going to drop my thing for his thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just some really common ways. I think there's about, four main reasons why people are starting a relationship with God, hanging out in the church, getting connected so that they can take care of what's concerning them.
What are
like
what are
to
those
feel
four
right.
ways?
Right?
Right.
Like to feel right about, like, at least that's what I experience a lot. People argue about what they believe theologically. And so they're like, part of coming on board with Christianity is like they think that they're right and other people who quote unquote don't believe in Jesus are wrong. And so it makes them feel good to
Being
have
right
the
feels
quote
so
unquote
good.
right answer
It's
or to
true.
argue rightly or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
That's an example of one?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Particularly when you're in a more like privileged context. Like if people have more stuff, if you're not fighting for survival, then you're more in kind of that philosophical culture. So now it's about winning arguments, right? And and in that world, you're looking to make sure like you have a sense of what's real. You know more things than other people. That becomes your concern over how you position yourself, because hey, you have enough food and all of that. So now you're just going, how do I win the next argument? And if you're going like, oh, I can get the inside scoop, the truth from God, well, then great. I'll have the truth, and they'll just be believing lies. I'll be right. They'll be wrong. And so there is an allure to that of like, great, I can feel like I have the insider's perspective. I've been found, they're all lost. So it just gives me a sense of I'm superior to others, makes me feel good, just the same way that we insult people in middle school.
Yep.
But the truth is, scripture doesn't say they're going to know that you're Christians by their argument.
By how
or
right
they're
about
going
they
to
are.
know
By
that
how
you're
right
Christian.
they are about things.
Yes, it's like they're going to know that they're Christians by their love. And so it is wild that we spend so much time arguing, being right, saying the thing, rather than actually loving people.
Yeah.
I'm going to get on a soapbox, y'all.
Yeah, careful.
I know.
Yeah, we can move you. We can move you past that. There's, because the other, I could write a whole book just kind of on, basically a test to see which is your spiritual form of narcissism, right?
Right.
And so maybe it's to be right, but a lot of the world is in the buckets of to get stuff.
Yep.
I mean,
prosperity gospel kind of a thing.
Right? Yeah. It's like, I'm going to use God because I need some more things, a house, people, a visa, whatever, and then there's, for folks again, who are more well off, it might be a more psychological need. So it's to, to feel good about myself. Right.
Yeah.
So I've done some things I don't like. There's some things I don't like about myself. And so, yeah. Or ultimately, the fourth one, more common in previous generations, during the hellfire and damnation preaching popularity of 18th century, 19th century, is to calm your fears about the future, like what's going to happen when I die.
Your ultimate destiny, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Of just like, yeah, I don't want to be afraid of death.
Right. Yeah.
Well, in
Yeah.
this
So
chapter, you talk
yeah, go ahead.
about. Sorry, did you have something else, Ben?
No, I was just gonna
Okay.
move on. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, in this chapter, you talk about the wealthy. And honestly, rich people back in Jesus' time had a bad rap. Tell us why that is. And then, is there hope for wealthy people to really be able to love God and live for Him? Because I would say everybody listening to this podcast in the grand scheme of the world is very wealthy. And so it's like, oh, I mean, I have a house, I have a phone, I have a car, like, and so what does that mean for us, I guess? But first tell us, like, why did the rich people have a bad rap in Jesus' time?
Two main reasons. And we find this both described like across the law and the prophets, and then outside of scripture, in a number of ancient Jewish writings. So they give us kind of the Jewish perspective that Jesus walked into in the first century on wealthy people. And that was one, they're rich because they ripped people off to get there. So that was the assumption. Like if you collected a lot, you were hurting people in the process.
Like
You took
Zacchaeus.
advantage of them.
Mhm.
Like Zacchaeus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you were, the Old Testament talks a lot about like, hey, don't like give about forgiving debts, particularly debts related to land, and how we shouldn't be charging interest, because it was trying to get at this thing of, oh, you had a drought, you had a problem, your crop got wiped out, you need someone to loan you like seeds and stuff to be able to grow and take care of your land so that hopefully you can produce food. So I'll lend that to you, but then I'm going to charge you back an inordinate amount and hopefully you won't be able to meet that. And
Mhm.
then I'll foreclose on you and I'll take your property. Right.
Yeah.
So then I took a vulnerable person and I created a debt structure that allowed me then to ultimately confiscate their land. So if I have multiple lands, it's because I was screwing people over. So that's the first main reason why rich people had a very bad view, because the only way you got there was by doing something wrong to others.
Mhm.
And then second, if you have a bunch of stuff and you're just keeping it to yourself, that means you're hoarding what you don't need rather than mercifully caring for those in need, which had always been a big part of God's instructions of like, the
Yeah.
reason why people will never suffer in poverty for forever is because those with resources will live with an open and generous hand. This is Deuteronomy 15. And
Mhm.
so that was the perception. Basically, you are unjust
Yep.
in how you got it, or you are unmerciful in how you hoard it.
Yes. I'll say, we're in the midst. I think this podcast will come out while we're in the midst of our book club, the Gravity Book Club, which we're reading. All Riches Come from Injustice, which is a book about the way that the early church sort of like the anti-mammon witness of the early church, and so many of the early church fathers essentially said what you just said. There is, is the fact that you have this obscene amount of wealth means that you took it unjustly and now you keep it unjustly. And there is a basic level of morality that says, hey, if you've got more than you need and your neighbor is in need, well, what are you doing holding on to your stuff? What are you doing holding on to your stuff? Give to your neighbor in need. So anyway,
Yeah.
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 Um,
It's shocking because Jesus, the New Testament really has nothing good to say about wealthy people unless they are radically generous, kind
yes,
of basically giving their way out of the upper class.
yes. Becoming unwealthy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the problem was the wealthiest Jewish people were the high priestly families.
Hmm.
Families from which the high priests in Jerusalem were being appointed,
Hmm.
slash, a lot of them just bought the right to the high priest from the Romans. So it
Hmm.
was all corrupt, So the largest mansions we've discovered where Jews lived, and we can tell they lived in these mansions due to the Jewish baths and the menorahs on the wall and everything. These like 10, there's a 10,000 square foot mansion you can go visit inside of
Wow.
the Jerusalem archaeological remains today. And you're talking about a 10,000 square foot mansion in the first century. And that is where one of the high priestly families, like the family of Annas, lived. And they were sitting there with like the fanciest Italian dishes and home decor, the most expensive stuff in the world. And everyone's like, what? How is the person who's supposed to be like our representative of God wearing the cool clothes in the temple where heaven meets earth, someone who has collected a bunch of wealth for themselves and is sitting on it in
Yeah.
a country with people suffering? That's wrong. And
Yeah.
Jesus felt the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the second question you posed, Christy, is the second chapter of the book that we're reading, which is just this: can the rich be saved? How would you answer that, Paul? According to Jesus.
Oh, right. That question comes up from Jesus's disciples.
That's right.
Because they notice the rich are not choosing to join their movement.
Yep.
And that's the reality. Because right, Jesus set up this dynamic, right? I mean, he basically said, if you seek the kingdom, all the things you need will be added to you, right? If you seek the kingdom, specifically righteousness, then all these things will be added to you, given to you, and it was like, well, how does that work? Well, it's because it was a system of sharing, which means that this is why the poor, the ostracized, the outcasts, the struggling in first century society were drawn to Jesus, followed him en masse. But those with wealth, once they understood, whoa, the sharing part, I can't handle that, right? So yeah, I mean, that's why Jesus was like, yeah, when it comes to the way people think, yeah, it's impossible for a rich person to really get on board with my movement, this kingdom vision. But it's like with God, like, yeah, I mean, it's possible that someone could say, I'll share. I've got access to some serious assets, but it is possible for someone to embrace like the proverbial pattern for handling money, which if you go back to the end of Proverbs and you read the advice from some of the guys with really weird names, Agur, this is in chapter 30 of Proverbs, who says, give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. Because if I grow rich, well, that's not good. I'll probably deny God and say, who is the Lord? But if I'm too poor, I'll start stealing and insult God's name, right? So there's this model, which is you're not supposed to go into abject poverty and end up doing desperate things that are wrong. And you're not supposed to have more than you need and become an arrogant, a-hole. Like,
right.
The idea is this middle way here where just enough to meet my own needs. And so if you have more beyond that, you've got some work to do with like generously caring for others. And that is possible. It is just rare.
Yeah, it's rare. And that there is I think Jesus is pointing out here too, like the formation, like once you begin hoarding wealth, there's something that sort of takes over, right? Psychologically, there's this sense of you feel like you can't afford to get rid of it. And there is this insane, I think it's insane. We've got people in our world right now, right, that have more money. They have access to more money, control over more money than they could possibly spend in, 100 lifetimes on themselves. And yet they still seek ways to accumulate more. So there's like an insanity to it, right? Where it's like, what are you even trying to get for yourself here, right? It becomes this psychological game that doesn't even make any sense anymore, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I was reminded of a couple quotes from Saint Basil, early church father from the 4th century, who said something very similar to that quote from Proverbs. He said, "For if we took only what was necessary to satisfy our own needs, giving the rest to those who lack, no one would be rich, no one would be poor, and no one would be in need.
Hmm.
That's a Christian preacher from the 4th century.
Yeah, and that'll ring true in any generation as the pattern to embrace.
Yes. Yeah.
It's interesting, like, half my job is student ministry, half my job is preaching. Um, and just last week on a Wednesday night with our youth group, we were talking about community and like, how does God meet our needs? Paul, I would love for you just to kind of, you're hinting at this, you're talking about this, but just very clearly, how does God meet our needs? And then I want to share about like just how we tried to help that within our little youth group, in just a second. So tell us, like, just clearly, how does God meet our needs?
Yeah, because I just made this statement from Matthew 6:33 that, if you seek the kingdom and specifically righteousness, then
Mhm.
all these things will be added to you. And in the context, it's kind of a section that goes back to verse 25 there, 25 to 33. These things refers to what Jesus has just been talking about, which is what to eat, what to wear, what to drink, so your basic survival needs.
Which
And
just
so,
for hang on just for a second, because a lot of times that is misinterpreted. We hear that like seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added to you. We think if we follow God, we get everything that we want. That's how it's been explained wrongly from the pulpit, right? And so you're saying,
yes.
nope, you got to look at the context of that. And actually the context is it's not just anything you want. Like I want the new Xbox, I want a new car, I want whatever. It's like your basic needs are what is being talked about in that.
Yeah. Because the conundrum Jesus is addressing at the end of Matthew chapter 6 is actually a problem he created with the advice he just gave. Because he said, don't hoard for
Right.
yourself.
Right.
But if I don't have a huge amount of financial reserves, or then what happens if things go wrong?
Right.
What happens if my car breaks down? What happens if someone breaks into my house? What happens if my house burns down? What happens if I lose my job? What happens if there's a big political crisis that wipes out our economic opportunities? What happens? Like, I'm very fearful of that. What do I do? Right. So, I mean,
Mhm.
he has to say, like, hey, don't worry about that. But, but, but why wouldn't we worry about? We should worry about that if you just told us, no, don't save up a bunch of stuff here in this
Mhm.
life. Like, I've got to worry about that. I am an intelligent human being. But he says, don't do it. And here's why. And you're correct that we normally think eventually Matthew 6:33 says, if you're just spiritual enough, if you seek the kingdom, and we tend to translate that as, well, not really the kingdom, but if you seek God, and we kind of think of seeking God as like, if you're like praying and going to church and super spiritual and you're like worshiping the Lord and reading your Bible, then if you fell on hard times, groceries would magically appear on your doorstep and checks would come in the mail from people you don't
Right.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
But Jesus says, no, here's why you don't have to worry about those things. He says it's kind of like how the birds don't have to worry about eating and the flowers don't have to worry about being taken care of.
Mhm.
And you're like, well, thanks for that. Still don't quite understand. Like I can go and look into those systems and I can figure out there's sun and photosynthesis and water. Like, yeah, there is a whole system that allows um, that to happen. Of course, it's not a perfect system. There's still flowers that die and birds that get killed and all of that. Um, but then it brings up the question, what is the system that God has created to meet all of our needs? And he says, seek the kingdom, specifically righteousness. And this is in Matthew 6. The Sermon on the Mount talks about righteousness a lot. It doesn't really spell out what it is. But by the time you get to the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus does tell a story. We get the rabbi with his stories,
Mhm.
introducing us to the world as we should see it. And he says, okay, there's a king, and he's going to decide who is righteous and who is not righteous. And what's the standard he uses? He says, anyone who, took care of the sick, anyone who fed the hungry, anyone who gave drink to the thirsty. So anyone who cares for the most vulnerable, those in prison, the immigrants, he says, those people are righteous. That's what righteousness does. So when Jesus says, if you seek a kingdom defined by compassionate care for the most vulnerable, then you will have your basic needs met when you fall on hard times,
Mhm.
right? And what he teaches us about how God meets our basic needs is the same thing that comes from Deuteronomy 15. It was the same original rules for Israel for how they were supposed to function. And in Deuteronomy 15, he says, there will be nobody poor among my people if you obey my commands today.
Mhm.
And we still think of that as like, oh, if we live perfectly righteous lives, perfect, do all the good, super spiritual, godly things, then we'll just get magical money. And again, no, in the context, if you do what I'm commanding you today, the thing he was commanding them today is be generous towards the poor.
Yes.
Because in a few verses later in Deuteronomy 15, the instructions, from God say, you will always have poor among you.
Mhm.
That's why you need to do what I'm commanding you today. Right. And this idea, it's not that God's people will never slide into poverty. It's that God's people will keep pulling them out.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
I think
we're
that's
the
a
ones. We're the
right.
ones that are meeting the needs of those around who need it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And there's a huge paradigm shift there that you're articulating, Paul, that I think, when we talk about mammon, um, what we're talking about is not just money, but like this whole, it's a system of idolatry. It's an ideology. It's a way of thinking about how this works that brackets out sharing, right? That assumes, oh, we're all selfishly just seeking, our own piles of money. And I mean, this is the lie of, you know, the lie of mammon is that if everybody just selfishly seeks out their own pile of money, everybody will be okay. But in fact, the paradigm for how God provides for us is, as you just articulated, is, oh, we provide for one another. The earth, I mean, the chapter 3 in the book that we're reading right now in book club says the earth is common. Like it's meant to be a common resource that supplies for our needs together as a people, as a community. And so again, just the basic posture of if I have, if I have more than I need and you have less than you need, well then I share with you. Why wouldn't I? Like what possible reason would there be not to share with you? You you have a
Yeah.
need, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well,
Yeah.
right. And the reason is because there's always been massive social public pressure
Yes.
to protect yourself, advance yourself.
Mhm.
Like you have a responsibility. Like
Yeah.
you should
You're
get that money, then you should invest that money, you should grow
right.
that money, you should reduce your taxes, you should not let anyone get access to it, government or others, like you, right? I mean, and it's like, and if some of
Yeah.
it's at risk, you should buy insurance, you should like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's so
And
there's a
then
pressure so that if I live generously, I feel dumb in
yeah,
society,
you're an
like I'm
idiot.
being irresponsible.
Yeah. You're an idiot and you're immoral, actually. You
Mm.
know? Why aren't you thinking about your kids? You should be thinking about their
Right,
future, rather than
right.
giving money away.
This actually gets me back to the practice that we did on Wednesday night. And because we were talking about this very thing, and we asked the students, like, what are the things that you have? Like, and I wanted them to really think about not just like, oh, I might have like a couple $100 in the savings account. I mean, like, what other things do you have to try to help people that could be something that would help somebody. And so they wrote down a bunch of things. Like they wrote down money, but they also wrote down, oh, I'm really good at math, or I, have a car, or I have an extra bedroom in my house, or whatever the things were. And then we challenged them and said, part of having God meet our needs through community, through each of us actually being generous to each other, is that the other side is that we have to share what we actually need, which in our society is very difficult. People don't want to come forward and be like, "Excuse me, I need help with whatever the thing is. I need a ride to the doctors, or I
Mhm.
can't see at night, and so it's really hard for me to, drive at nighttime, an elderly person might say, or, I need help with rent, or whatever the thing is. It's sometimes embarrassing to share what we
Yeah.
need. And being in a community, you have to share that. And so we had a board, and they put all the things that they have on one board and little post-it notes with their name and a phone number. And then we had another board, and it was all the things that they need with their name and their phone number. And then we left it there. And we're like,
Mm,
this is part of being community. Walk up, look at this. Maybe something that you have could actually help somebody who has that need. You
mhm.
guys, it was amazing. It was so
Yeah.
beautiful. There were
Yeah.
kids that were like, I really need help in chemistry. And some person was like, I'm really good in science. And they took their phone numbers, they called each other, and they actually helped each other. Right.
That's
But
great.
there were big needs listed. I mean, there was
Mhm.
one family who was like, yeah, my son is getting evicted next month and he doesn't know where he's going to live. Does anybody have connections about another place to live? And
Mhm.
anyway, part of God meeting our needs is like we as a community need to know what those needs are, and then
Mhm.
need to be generous with what we actually have and be willing to not to be able to give it up and not just hoard it ourselves.
Yeah. That's great, Christy. I appreciate that example.
Yeah.
We've got a benevolence fund at our church. That's this is the very specific reason for it is just some of us have more than we need, and so you feel free to contribute to this fund. It operates outside of our normal operating budget as a church,
Yeah.
and it's just there for meeting needs. And people in our church and people that know people from our church will just say,
Mhm.
"Hey, I just lost my job. Need $1,500 for rent and some groceries."
Yep.
And we'll do a little looking into it, just make sure it's a legit
Sure.
request, and normally you know give money.
Yep.
And the stories that are so cool to me are the ones where somebody last year who was in need, they now have a job and they have more than they need, and they contribute to that fund. It's like
Yeah.
they're like, oh, why wouldn't I do that? this
Right.
this was how God provided for me, and so I want to participate in how God can provide for others who are in need,
Yeah.
in our community. And it's just a great way, like very similar to what you did, was it's actually connecting people in
Right.
the community. It's not just about the financial provision so you don't get kicked out of your house, although that's that's a big deal. But it's also a community thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had to limit it to our own church community just because we get tons of requests from who knows where, and we're not equipped to field all of these requests. We're not a food bank. We're not a, what I mean? That's not what we are. Um, but there's plenty of needs just in our own church, and so it's like that's fine. So, or among people
We
that
we were
our church people know.
we're meant to live this way, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
one of the one-liners in one of these chapters in the book about Jesus and the wealthy is, do you really want to gain the whole world and in the process lose your soul?
yeah,
Like, do, do you really want to become inhuman in this greedy pursuit of hoarding for yourself? Like, there's a part of us that was made. It's hard because it's dangerous and we get mistreated and it doesn't always work right, but we were made to for interdependence. But
yes,
our culture only celebrates independence.
Yeah.
hmm,
And so that's a tough dynamic, right? And the biblical rhythm is kind of set from the Abrahamic pattern, which is Genesis 12. God's like, I want to bless you so that you can bless all the other families in the earth.
yeah,
And that becomes the rhythm, this divine God, hey, forgive others as you were forgiven. I'm going to love you first, and then you'll have love for others. It's right. We were meant to be pipelines that pass on the blessing, not buckets that collect it for
mm,
ourselves. And that
hmm,
is the shift from that narcissistic tendency of, I'm going to use God to get stuff,
yeah,
and that realization of, I was designed to give stuff.
yeah, yeah. And that's I love that. It's such a compelling vision to me. I hope it is for our listeners as well. Um, it's such a compelling way to live. And you're right, it's risky. We have less control because we are relying on other people to say, I want to live that way too. Right. And it feels a little easier to
Absolutely.
just assume that we're all in it for ourselves, and we can just compete with one another and, hope the poor are okay. But so it's, it's risky, but it's a really compelling way to live. And what you just said there about pipelines reminds me of another Saint Basil quote. Maybe we can end on this,
Mm.
or Saint Basil. I don't know how to pronounce it. I feel
Oh,
like I
that's
go
a
back and
fight.
forth.
Those are fighting
Is that a
words in
fight?
our house, Ben.
Yeah. Paul, what do
I
you
s-
say in
Basil.
terms of the person, Basil?
I
Yeah.
say basil.
You say basil, but I feel like as I said it, I was like, oh no, that's an herb.
That's an herb. Yeah.
That's an herb.
You would cook with that. You don't want
You
to
would cook with that.
a,
You don't
a
want to
saint.
cook with Saint Basil.
Oh my goodness.
God might be mad about that. Anyway, here's the quote. When wealth is scattered in the manner in which our Lord directed, it naturally returns. But when it is gathered, it naturally disperses. If you try to keep it, you will not have it. If you scatter it, you will not lose it. He's a wise dude, wasn't he?
Very wise.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's a good preacher.
Yeah.
I like those Cappadocian fathers and Macrina. Those guys were great.
Well, you're losing us now.
Oh, sorry.
You're going really old school there.
All right.
Cappadocia.
The Cappadocia, that's St. Basil, St. Gregory, Macrina, etc. All good. Maybe good enough for now. Again, the book is What Jesus Meant by Dr. Paul Penley. Paul, this is fun. This is going to be a fun series. Looking forward to more.
We'll see you next time.